Central Arizona, the bottom of a canyon 1,600 feet deep. For 96 straight years, a 25-foot concrete wall has sat at the base of that canyon, holding back nearly every drop a desert creek carries. Not because the creek ran dry on its own, because the wall took the water first, every day, funneled into wooden flumes, spun through turbines 100 miles from anyone who'd ever laid eyes on the canyon itself. Almost a century of that. Then, in a single summer, the wall came down and the water found its own way home again. Downstream, the toll is written straight into the rock. Turquoise pools that once defined this canyon shrank to puddles. The stone-building process that gave the creek its name went quiet along entire stretches. Fish that exist nowhere else on the planet were squeezed into a sliver of the water they'd always known. Arizona Public Service owned that wall. In the summer of 2005, the utility did something almost unheard of anywhere in the region. They pulled the machinery, opened the gate, and left. The scientists who'd spent years getting ready to watch what happened next weren't just surprised by the result. It rewrote what anyone thought they knew about how fast a dead desert stream can heal. And this year, the story turned again, not because the river failed to come back, but because of who showed up once it did. To understand why this creek was worth fighting over, go back to 1900. That's the year a rancher named Lou Turner filed a claim on a stretch of water called Fossil Creek. Not because of fossils, there aren't any. Early travelers found twigs and leaves wrapped in pale stone shells that looked petrified. That stone was travertine, a form of limestone the water lays down naturally wherever the current slows. Fossil Creek carries so much dissolved calcium that it builds rock out of thin air, fed by springs pushing out 20,000 gallons a minute at a rock-steady 70 to 72 degrees, through drought, through flood, for thousands of years without a break. Turner didn't see travertine in that reliability. He saw electricity. Getting a power plant into that canyon meant crossing terrain with no road at all, so the crews built one first. More than 400 mules and 600 men, most of them Apache and Mojave laborers, hauled turbines and cement along a 40-mile trail cut into raw rock, down to where the canyon bottomed out 1,600 feet below the rim. Some of them didn't make it back out, neither did some of the animals. A $1.5 million bond issue, financed in part through a broker named S.W. Childs, got construction moving in 1908. The Childs power plant switched on June 21, 1909. A second plant, Irving, named for financier Irving Bonbright, followed within a few years. Between them, the two plants pulled the creek's entire flow through 8,800 feet of wooden flumes and a 25-foot dam. By 1920, that setup was generating roughly 70% of the electricity keeping Phoenix running. Its streetlights, its streetcars, the valley's first air conditioners, all drawing current from water nobody in the city ever thought twice about. The honors followed. A historic mechanical engineering landmark by 1976. A spot on the National Register of Historic Places by 1991. Recognition, piling up for a project that was quietly strangling the very thing that made it possible. Nobody in Phoenix saw the other half of this story. Below the dam, the creek was dying by inches. Flow that should have run 43 cubic feet per second dropped to 1 or 2. Travertine stopped forming along stretch after stretch. The turquoise pools that had glowed for centuries thinned out to nothing, and non-native fish slid into the gap, crowding out species that had evolved for this one stream and no other on Earth. This wasn't decline. It was erasure, one quiet year at a time, while the dam upstream kept collecting plaques. By the 1990s, the arithmetic had flipped. The plants were old, and against a modern power grid, their output barely registered anymore. Strange fate for a facility that once helped keep the lights on in Phoenix. Environmental groups, the Center for Biological Diversity among them, pushed hard on what the diversion had actually cost. The travertine, the wetlands, the native fish sliding toward collapse. In 1999, Arizona Public Service made a call that genuinely stunned people used to losing this exact fight. No lawsuit forced it, no judge ordered it. The company simply agreed to shut both plants down and hand the creek its water back. Only once before in American history had a dam come down purely for environmental reasons. The Edwards Dam in Maine 6 years earlier. But Edwards had cleared water for salmon, a fish worth serious money. Nobody was making money off Fossil Creek's suckers, dace, and chub. This was restoration with no economic case behind it at all, and it still ran roughly $13 million to pull off. At the ceremony marking the shutdown, Yavapai Apache tribal historian Vincent Randall stood at the edge of the same canyon his ancestors had once hauled cement and turbines into, the same trail that had killed men and mules alike a century earlier. His people built that dam, he told the crowd, and had been proud of it for decades. It had lit a city. It had put food on tables. But its time had passed, he said, and there was no use pretending otherwise. Then he turned toward the water and asked the creek for forgiveness. Not for building the dam, for taking so long to let it go. Good intentions don't clean a river by themselves. By 2004, the starved channel below the dam was crawling with invasive fish, primed to explode the moment full flow returned. And take the exact native species, this whole effort existed to save down with them. That fall, nearly 100 people from the Forest Service, Arizona Game and Fish, and Northern Arizona University moved in together, cleared the creek of everything that didn't belong, and sealed off a barrier to keep it that way. Behind the dam itself sat a second problem. Almost 25,000 cubic yards of built-up sediment, 96 years in the making. Engineers expected most of it to wash downstream once the gate opened. No worse, by their own estimate, than what a single heavy storm might carry, though it could still smother sensitive habitat on its way through. The gate opened on June 18, 2005. Fossil Springs, for the first time since 1909, ran the full length of its own canyon again. It didn't come as a wall of water. It crept, feeling out old channels, filling pools that had sat empty for generations, edging downstream while scientists and locals lined the banks to watch. Nobody had a script for this moment. No desert stream anywhere in the American Southwest had ever gotten its full flow handed back before. One scientist had been preparing for exactly this for years. Jane Marks, an aquatic ecologist at Northern Arizona University, had spent that time quietly cataloging the starved creek, its chemistry, its fish, how fast its rock still formed, against a healthy stretch upstream that had never lost a drop of flow. Almost no restoration project gets studied this way because almost no scientist knows years ahead of time which river is about to change. Marks did. That head start ended up mattering more than anything else. Marks and her team were bracing for a slow crawl back to health, something that might take decades to show up in the data. It took seasons. Photosynthesis climbed almost right away. The stream's ability to process nutrients snapped back to match the healthy reach upstream. Not a gradual return, but something closer to a system flipping back on. NAU geologist Rod Parnell, who'd tracked the creek's travertine both before and after the shutoff, described watching the mineral thicken fast enough to see with the naked eye. You could practically stand on the bank and watch bedrock forming, he said. Later, NAU research went further still, tracing how algae and microbial colonies were catching calcium out of the current and speeding the whole process along. Biology doing work that chemistry alone couldn't explain. Within a 6-mile stretch below the springs, new travertine terraces began rising again, some gaining over 2 centimeters a year. A river measurably becoming stone. The fish, though, the fish were the real story, and the scale of it is hard to take at face value. Read these numbers twice if you have to. Sonora suckers came back roughly 17-fold. Desert suckers, about 52-fold. The round-tailed chub, a species that had been sliding toward local extinction, rebounded nearly 70 times over. And the speckled dace, a small, unremarkable native minnow that had all but vanished from the canyon, came back more than 150 times its former numbers. A fish standing on the edge of disappearing came back over 100-fold in the space of a few years. The frogs noticed too. Forest Service biologist Janie Agiagos, who worked alongside Mark's team, watched tadpoles and young frogs return to stretches that had sat essentially empty for decades. It's crazy how much the habitat has changed, she said. Fossil Creek today holds 9 native fish species, and a claim no other river stretch in Arizona can make. It's the longest reach in the state, with a native fish community completely free of anything non-native. Beyond the water, roughly 200 species of birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians move through the corridor now, including sensitive species like the southwestern willow flycatcher and the Chiricahua leopard frog. And the 50-acre botanical area near the springs alone holds 166 documented plant species. By 2009, the round-tailed chub, years earlier a species fighting for survival, had its own catch-and-release-only fishing season, the first of its kind the state had ever run. Success handed the creek a problem nobody had planned for. Word got around about warm, clear, turquoise water sitting in the middle of a brutal desert, and people followed it. Thousands of them a year, trampling the banks, leaving trash across the exact habitat the restoration had just rebuilt. A river that outlasted a hydroelectric empire was suddenly being worn down by coolers and water shoes. Congress gave nearly 17 miles of the creek wild and scenic river status in 2009, one of only 2 rivers in Arizona to carry it. That didn't slow anyone down, so the Forest Service reached for permits instead, and the limits have only tightened since. Heading into the 2026 season, daily reservation caps weren't enough anymore. The permit area now shuts down entirely, Monday through Thursday, open only Friday through Sunday for the whole April to October stretch. A river almost nobody bothered visiting, a generation ago now has fewer open days a week than most retail stores. The springs don't register any of it. They're doing exactly what they've done for thousands of years. The same 20,000 gallons every minute, stone rising out of moving water, waiting to see whether the people who saved this place can also manage to leave it be. One choice, back in 2005, to stop taking and simply let a river run, rebuilt one of the most complete ecosystems left in the American Southwest, faster than anyone tracking it thought possible. Vincent Randall didn't ask the creek to forgive the dam. He asked it to forgive the people who took too long letting it go. 20 years later, a different crowd is standing on the same banks. Coolers, water shoes, weekend permits, and the creek may be quietly waiting on an apology from them too. So, here's the real question. Fossil Creek proved a broken desert river can heal faster than anyone believed possible. Can the people who love it enough to fight over a 3-day-a-week parking permit prove they can leave it alone long enough to stay that way? Tell me where you land in the comments. This is Hidden Latitude. We go looking for the recoveries nobody else is covering.